Imagine looking up in 1943 and seeing the sky itself on fire. Every single day at high noon, the American bombers, those mighty B-17 Flying Fortresses and B-24 Liberators, streamed in. Silver rose that just never seemed to end, dumping thousands of tons of explosives onto German factories, critical rail yards, and entire cities. The Reich had absolutely no answer strong enough to punch back. Their industry was getting hammered, and the U.S. 8th Air Force was growing faster than they could possibly replace their own losses. This wasn't just a military problem. It was a crisis. So the desperate Luftwaffe decided they had to ditch subtlety and build a weapon of pure desperation. They took one of their best fighters and turned it into an airborne tank. Its name? The FW-190 Sternbach, the battering ram. This was it. This machine represented Germany's final, brutal hammer blow against the relentless American offensive. The simple truth was the Germans were drowning. The U.S. 8th Air Force was growing so fast that replacing losses became a joke. Every single week, you had hundreds, not dozens, but hundreds of these massive four-engine flying fortresses leaving England and heading straight for the industrial heart of the Reich. They flew in the bright, relentless daylight, locked into these terrifyingly tight defensive boxes. What was happening to the Luftwaffe? Their once elite fighter force was being absolutely butchered. Their best standard planes, the agile Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs, could try to slash through that wall of lead, but they only lasted seconds before the defensive fire shredded them to pieces. Pilots had a chilling new phrase for the slaughter, Die Halle oben, the hell above. The sky itself had become lethal. This couldn't last. So, in the desperate spring of 1943, Colonel Hans Gunnar von Fusion and General Gallen agreed on a radical, brutal idea. They would take the solid, proven airframe of the FW-190A-6 and armor it like a tank. So they went radical. They literally bolted thick steel plates around the cockpit and fuel tanks, turning a sleek fighter into a flying tank. Forget regular glass. The pilot peered out through a massive, armored windscreen. They then upgraded the guns to something truly terrifying. Twin 20mm cannons backed up by twin 30mm Malawian Quach's 108s, firing explosive shells designed to tear a bomber's wing completely off in a single, devastating burst. The trade-off was immense, though. This heavy Sternbach climbed like a brick and handled horribly. It was useless against agile enemy fighters. But that didn't matter. Its only job was pure execution. Volunteer squadrons formed up to pilot this new weapon, adopting the grim motto, Keiner kommt durch, or none shall pass. Their training was insane, flying wingtip to wingtip straight into a hail of defensive fire, ignoring the tracers, closing the distance to less than 100 meters, and then unleashing hell with all four cannons simultaneously. When they finally hit the trigger, the entire plane shuddered. It wasn't just a burst. The force and four heavy cannons ripped the target apart. AB-17 disappearing in a flash of fire and shredded aluminum. But there was a brutal lesson hammered into every pilot. The instructor's terrifying mantra. You break formation, you die alone. You hold that line, maybe, just maybe, you live long enough to watch that explosion. And trust me, most guys never got to see it. This terrifying new doctrine first went live in late 1943, when the Sternbach units rose up to meet American bomber streams over places like Munster and Ostrobin. Down on the ground, people looked up and saw these black dots streak into the massive formations. Then, asterisk boom asterisk, sudden blossoms of flame appeared as B-17s just vaporized midair. For a heartbeat, it felt like maybe, just maybe, the tide was finally turning. I mean, look at Major Wilhelm Moritz and his 4/GG3. In one engagement, they tore straight through the formation, annihilating 24 bombers in a matter of minutes. But that victory came with a shocking butcher's bill. Nearly a third of the pilots who attacked were either killed or horribly wounded. The Luftwaffe had found their hammer. Sure, but that weapon was essentially designed to consume the men who dared to use it. As the casualties kept climbing higher and higher, the desperation in command went biblical. Commanders started giving orders that sound insane today. Hold your fire until you are practically shaking hands with the enemy, 300 meters or less. And if your heavy cannons jam up, Rammed the damn thing. Seriously. A few pilots actually followed through, slicing their armored FW-190s right through a bomber's tail and punching out at the absolute last microsecond. Propaganda hailed them as the Reich's new heroes. The guys actually flying, they called it what it was, sheer suicidal madness. They knew the awful truth. This wasn't tactical fight anymore. It was a meat grinder, a contest of attrition the Reich could never win. You shot down one bomber? Great. 10 more showed up at sunrise the next day. But still, they climbed into those heavy, armored FW-190s, painted black crosses on the fuselage, and flew back into the inferno. But the rules of the game were about to change completely, because in early 1944, a terrifying new shadow showed up right next to the B-17s. This wasn't just another fighter. This was the long-range escort. First, the beefy P-47 Thunderbolt, and then the absolute killer, the sleek P-51 Mustang. Why did this matter? These American planes could follow the bombers all the way to Berlin and back home again. Suddenly, the hunters, the Sternbach guys built to smash slow, heavy bombers, were the ones being hunted. These pilots had zero chance against the agile escorts. They couldn't outrun them. They couldn't turn with them. Entire German units were just wiped off the map in a single afternoon. That black smoke over Germany, it wasn't just American losses anymore. By mid-1944, the Luftwaffe had run out of tricks. Their last hope wasn't technology. It was sheer, dumb bravery. The squadrons kept flying, but their cockpits were now filled with 19-year-old kids who knew the terrible odds. They flew only to buy minutes, knowing full well they were delaying the inevitable. Look, the cities below were already dust. These guys knew they were just delaying the inevitable collapse. Their heavy armored FW-190 was a symbol of their courage, yes, but also of total futility. It was a moment they realized that guts and grit alone couldn't beat industrial might and sheer numbers. It was determination fighting technology. It was firefighting steel. And, spoiler alert, the fire always runs out first. By early 1944, the routine was grinding. Every single morning, those damn sirens went off, and those columns of B-17s just appeared over the western horizon like a nightmare clockwork. The German people had a name for them, Fliegenfestungen, flying fortresses, and they genuinely seemed endless, stretching beyond the curvature of the earth. For the desperate Luftwaffe Sternbach, the mission was boiled down to something brutally simple and frankly suicidal. Climb up, find the bombers, shatter that formation, and don't you dare come back until the job is done. The age of the bomber killer had officially hit its brutal, bloody peak. Imagine this. The new Sturm Staffel didn't just fly. They flew shoulder to shoulder, jammed so tight, 12 or 16 of these armored beasts, that they trusted the guy next to them more than their own altimeter. This was insane discipline. They stacked up wing to wing, forming a moving wall of steel and cannon fire, designed for one terrible purpose: to punch a single catastrophic hole straight through a bomber stream that might be 100 flying fortresses strong. They knew this was a one-way trip. To scrape just a couple extra miles per hour, they literally stripped the paint off the planes, and the parachute? They ditched that too. Too much weight for the fight they were about to have. Before taxiing, many pilots scribbled quick, heart-wrenching notes to their families and jammed them right under the seat cushion, just in case. Major Moritz, their commander, didn't mince words before the mission on the 11th of January, 1944. He looked them dead in the eye and gave the ultimate suicide instruction. You will meet them at 300 meters. You fire once, and you will see nothing but fire in return. It wasn't a mission. It was an execution order. So, what happened near Oscherleben? 60 of these crazy tough FW-190 Sternbach pilots, the Storm Rams, slammed headfirst into the American 3rd Air Division. Forget careful tactics. This was a suicide charge. They just dove, cannons wide open, and the destruction was immediate. We're talking pure, unadulterated horror. The sheer force was so insane that one burst from a massive 30mm shell could rip a B-17's wing right off its socket, disintegrating entire bomber boxes instantly. American crews weren't fighting. They were watching in absolute terror, as these armored fighters closed the point-blank range, turned the fortress into scrap, and then vanished into the explosion. How long did this madness last? 20 minutes. In that tiny window, the Luftwaffe managed to shred 26 bombers. But here's the grim kicker. They lost half their attack force. Think about that trade. For every single fortress that dropped, another Sternbach pilot went down burning right alongside it. Did they learn their lesson? Nope. A month later at Regensburg, it was the same nightmarish scene. The sky was a massive chaotic tangle of contrails and smoke, and the gunners were so desperate they were firing until their barrels were literally glowing red hot, diving right to the debris field. But here's the brutal truth. Every single success they logged came at the cost of an experienced German pilot, a resource the Luftwaffe simply could not replace. They were burning through their most skilled men at an unsustainable pace. Now, let's talk about the weapon they relied on, the 30mm 108 Malawian Quatches cannon mounted on those heavy Focke-Wulfs. It was short-barreled and low velocity, built for one thing, instant point-blank annihilation. Get this. A single terrifying 2-second burst from this monster released more explosive weight than the entire bomb load of a standard Bf-109 fighter. Pilots learned to count that burst instinctively. Asterisk 1. 2. Pull-out. Asterisk missing that count meant either dying in the massive fireball you just created or getting caught by the concentrated wall of American defensive fire. Hitting the bomber stream wasn't a dogfight. It was diving headfirst into a storm. The collective gunfire of 100 bombers merged into one single, physical, deafening roar. Tracer rounds carved thick, red tunnels through the chaos, while fragments of shredded aluminum drifted down like deadly snow. Inside those cramped, shaking cockpits, German pilots gripped the controls so fiercely their gloves tore, their vision blurring from the sheer, relentless vibration in G-forces. They called that whole mess the heartbeat of hell, that vibrating chaos of smoke and metal. But just when they thought the nightmare couldn't get worse, the sky fundamentally changed in the spring of 1944. Suddenly, there were P-51 Mustangs, sleek, lightning-fast, and equipped with drop tanks. That meant they could escort the American heavy bombers all the way to Berlin. The German pilots initially just brushed them off. Another wave of fighters, big deal. But then the Mustangs kept climbing, soaring right past 20,000 feet. They didn't attack the bombers. They waited high above the stream, diving like silver hawks specifically onto the Sternbach attack groups as they formed up. The hunters had officially become the hunted. That heavy armor, which was their only defense, became a death sentence. They were too sluggish to escape. Survivors could only recall flashes of silver, the terrifying roar cannon fire, and watching comrades instantly vanish. By summer, their losses weren't bad. They were catastrophic. Guys would take off, and before they even landed, entire units were just gone. How desperate do you have to be to keep fighting? In July 1944, we heard this chilling radio message from a German pilot that sums up the mood. I have one cannon jammed. Fine, I'll finish with my propeller. Think about that mindset. This man literally flew his fighter head-on into a massive B-24 bomber. Neither plane survived the collision. That same month, the commander of JG-3 gave an order that wasn't tactics. It was a death sentence. Whole formation, no matter what, even if the American escorts were tearing you apart. Propaganda tried to spin these insane actions as Selbstopferflug, self-sacrifice flights, but inside the Luftwaffe, morale was utterly broken. The veterans had a dark, bitter name for the new reality, a suicide squadron with paperwork. They knew the cost, but they kept climbing into those cockpits because duty demanded it, and because they could see their home cities burning beneath the endless streams of bombers, which they simply could not stop. By autumn 1944, American air superiority was absolute. Radar networks, Mustangs, and masked formations left no gaps. Every mission began with the same routine. Climb, intercept, die, repeat. The Luftwaffe still scored victories. Isolated, fortresses falling in fire, but each triumph was a smaller miracle bought with irreplaceable lives. The pilots were young, the aircraft aging, the fuel dwindling. Even the mechanics began cannibalizing wrecks on the airfield to keep a handful flying. The once mighty air arm of the Reich had been reduced to fragments of courage holding back inevitability. The Sturmbatch had been born from a need to strike fear into the bombers. It ended as a symbol of how fear had turned inward for the men who flew it. Each sortie was both defiance and farewell. They left contrails that faded in the same sky they could no longer command. When the war ended, a few surviving FW-190s sat rusting on empty runways, guns silent, armor scorched. They had done everything they could. They had flown into the storm and shattered upon it. Winter 1944. The Reich lay beneath smoke. Every factory, every rail yard, every city glowed red at night. Above it all, the daylight bombers came in endless wave, silver clouds across a black horizon. For the Sturmgruppen pilots, each climb into the freezing sky was a ritual of defiance. They no longer asked if they would return, only how long they could hold the line before the sky itself collapsed. Fuel was scarce, replacement parts non-existent. Airfields once packed with hundreds of FW-190s now held a dozen flyable machines. Pilots were younger, every month 18, sometimes 17, trained in weeks instead of years. Veterans who survived the early battles called them children flying iron. Coffins. Each sortie began with mechanics pushing aircraft to the runway by hand. To save fuel, takeoff meant faith. Landing meant luck. They still painted. The black crosses still loaded the 30mm shells, still climbed into the same endless war. By February 1945, the Allied air campaign was total. Mustangs roamed Germany at will, strafing trains, trucks, even bicycle messengers. The Sturmbatch pilots were forced to launch from hidden forest strips, scattering the moment they touched down. On clear days, the bomber streams stretched from horizon to horizon. When the fighters intercepted, they often faced 10-to-1 odds. Radio chatter dissolved into panic, static, and silence. Some never fired a shot. They were destroyed before reaching firing range. The Luftwaffe had become a shadow of itself, a name painted on wreckage. Still they flew not for victory anymore, but for duty, for comrades, for habit. One pilot wrote in his log, "Every flight feels like stepping into history's closing door." They spoke less about defending Germany and more about buying time for civilians to flee, time for bombers to waste another hour over empty airfields. Courage had become mechanical. They climbed because it was their turn to climb. Each mission was a single act of resistance written in smoke. By spring, most surviving Sturmbachs fought in fragments, small groups intercepting bomber trails over Saxony and Bavaria. Occasionally, they broke through the escort curtain. For seconds, the old power-return cannon burst, tearing into a fortress, fire streaking across the sky. Then the escorts arrived, P-51s and P-47, sow dove from above fast as judgment. The armored FW-190s couldn't evade. Their weight became a death sentence. Many were shot apart before even reaching the clouds. From the ground, villagers saw burning. Fighters tumble like meteors spiraling into the fields they had defended for so long. April 1945, Berlin was surrounded. What remained of JG-3, JG-4, and JG-300 still mustered flights when fuel could be found. They flew from makeshift runways between trees, sometimes without radios, guided only by instinct and memory. When the final order came, scramble, they rose into the gray dawn one last time. No one expected to return. They fired at the bomber formations above the capital until ammunition ran out, then dived through the smoke of their own burning city, a few landed on grass strips in silence. Others vanished. The war in the air had ended exactly where it began in fire. When the guns fell silent, the wrecks remained. Rows of shattered FW-190s lined the edges of ruined airfields. Wings blackened, canopies cracked. To the occupying soldiers, they were just debris. To the men who had flown them, they were gravestones with engines. Historians later called the stern grain a weapon of courage built for a war already lost. Their aircraft could destroy bombers, but not stop an empire of industry. Technology, bravery, and sacrifice had reached their limit, and the limit broke first. Today, only a handful of FW-190s survive, restored and silent in museums. Visitors see sleek lines, not the weight of armor or the fear in every takeoff. Yet those who study the records know what the pilots faced: a sky filled with fire and the certainty that every mission might be the last. The Sturmix stands as both warning and tribute. That courage without hope is still courage, and that, in the final days of the war, men still climbed into their machines, looked at the horizon, and flew straight into history.